My Little Avengers, written by KoolerKid, read by Bernie Man Miranda. Apologies for any flubs in the reading, as I am reading this locked in my own closet, and usually in one quick shot per chapter. So, any flubs, I apologize. Chapter 1. Celestia's sun was just breaching the horizon as Macintosh Apple, more commonly known as Big Macintosh or Big Mac, current head of the Apple family and owner of Sweet Apple Acres, awoke from a peaceful night's sleep. The bright red earth pony gave a loud yawn as he heaved his enormous frame upright, the bed springs cracking beneath him. He had the bed made specially by his friend in town, Featherdown, to accommodate his unusual size, but it still complained whenever he moved suddenly. Big Macintosh went about his morning routine as he did every morning. He went into the bathroom and splashed some water on his face to chase away the last of sleep. He brushed his teeth quickly and efficiently. His hooves gripped the toothbrush with the surety born of long practice. He re-entered his room and gave the mane of his Smarty Pants doll a quick brushing, a relatively new addition to his routine. He donned his usual horse collar and turned to leave the room, only to come face to face with his calendar. His calendar had a great many marks upon it in red ink, marking days of importance to the running of the farm. The end of apple buck season was always busy. This month of the calendar was particularly covered in ink. But today, right near at the very bottom of the calendar, was different, because instead of the usual detailed note, it was bare but for the words, "The Day," written on it and circled. It always managed to sneak up on him, Big Mac thought. With the craziness of the apple buck season, trying to harvest all the many trees that grew around Sweet Apple Acres before the change of seasons, he always forgot the day. It might seem strange to other ponies that he'd forget such an important date, but those ponies had never tried running a farm. There was no work to be done today, not for him. The last he had tried to help out with on the day, Applejack had threatened to cut off his own tail and make him eat it. Big Mac has widely chosen not to test her. He supposed he could go back to sleep if he wanted, but he was far too used to rising with the sun. He doubted he'd ever get any rest. So he left his room and headed downstairs into the kitchen. Even if Applejack wouldn't let him help on the farm, Celestia herself wouldn't able to keep him from doing something, even if it was just cooking breakfast for his family. And yet, as he entered the kitchen, he found that even that simple chore had been taken from him. Granny Smith snoozed in her chair as piles of her signature apple pancakes cooled on the countertop. Big Mac had always had a weakness for his grandmother's pancakes. Clearly, the dear old mare had stayed up late last night, cooking his favorite treat. His slight disappointment in his inability to help was drowned out by a warm feeling of gratitude. He'd sat down at the table with a larger helping of the delicious sweet pancakes than was strictly necessary, when a wild thumping on the stairs indicated the arrival of a certain hyperactive filly. Apple Bloom rarely awoke this early, but today was the day. She didn't want to be late to greet her brother. Big Mac stepped away from his plate and braced himself just in time to meet a flying tackle from his younger sister. "Happy birthday, big brother!" Apple Bloom chirped happily. Big Mac smiled as he carefully returned the filly's hug. "Morning, Bloom," he drawled, setting her down carefully. "Seems Granny Smith made her some pancakes. Want some?" "Do I?" Apple Bloom explained, excitable as always. With a chuckle, Big Mac served his younger sister some pancakes as another, much calmer set of hoofsteps on the stairs signaled the arrival of Big Mac's last remaining family member. "Happy birthday, Big Mac," Applejack called cheerfully, if a little sleepily, as she entered the kitchen. Applejack had always been a heavy sleeper, but she refused to let that stop her from waking up on time. Big Mac worried about her sometimes, but ever since the spectacles of last year's apple buck season, she'd taken much better care of herself. "Y'all found the pancakes that Granny Smith made for you?" She served herself some. "So, what's the plan?" Big Mac thought for a moment. Normally, when he had a rare day off, he liked to find a quiet corner to read. He's actually quite a fan of adventure novels, but opportunities to read were too few. As appealing as the idea sounded, when though what just wouldn't do for today, he had to do something special for your birthday. Otherwise, it was just another day. "I think I'll go hiking," he said finally. "I haven't been up in them mountains in years." "The mountains?" Applejack looked distinctly uncomfortable. "I don't know, Mac. It can get mighty dangerous up there. Girls and I saw a hydra up there once. Well, ran from a hydra, same thing. Not to mention that it used to be a dragon up there. Who knows what could have moved in after it left." Big Mac gave his sister a rare smile. "When did you become the reasonable one?" Seeing Applejack's annoyed face, he gave her a quick nuzzle. "Aw, don't worry none, sis. I'll be fine. I can take care of myself." Applejack just sighed and I know, I just worry, that's all. Y'all know what we couldn't get on without Big Mac and Applejack both turned towards the corner to see Apple Bloom covered in pancakes. Apparently, she tried to reach the plate on the corner for second helpings, only to result in a broken plate and new pancake coat. "Whoops," she said sheepishly. Applejack rolled her eyes. You finish your breakfast and get ready for your hack yours, Mac. I'll take care of this.
Yup,
Big Mac replied, mildly relieved not to have to deal with the sticky filly. Y'all be careful now, you hear? Applejack said as she helped secure Big Mac's saddlebags.
Yep. Don't worry, I'll be back before Pinkie Pie's birthday party.
The large stallion promised, giving his sister an affectionate muzzle.
You look after Apple Bloom and Granny Smith. Carrot Top will be by later to check up on you.
Check up on me? Applejack cracked a smile. Don't you trust me? I'm just a little bit old for a babysitter, Mac.
Well, it ain't you I'm worried about. Big Mac reassured her. Apple Bloom invited her friends over to lunch day. Unless you want to deal with them on your own.
Applejack made a face. Never mind. Send all the babysitters you want.
Macintosh gave a low chuckle. Thought so. Take care, sis.
He gave her another muscle and headed out. Big Macintosh always loved the outdoors. The fresh air, the smell of nature. He counted himself lucky that his work required him to stay outside all day, rather than cooped up in a stuffy office somewhere. Still, farm work kept him so busy, he really had time to stop and enjoy himself. As he hiked up the gently sloping mountain path, he kept his pace relaxed, stopping frequently to smell the flowers or give a crumb of bread to a passing animal, or simply admire the scenery. And what scenery! Even only halfway up the mountain, the view from up here was simply breathtaking. More than once, Mac found himself wishing he was an artist or a poet, so he could capture the beauty of the naturally rolling hills and the wide open plains of the grass below him. Even a camera would do. Sadly, Macintosh had never been a very artistic pony, so he simply admired the scene and continued his upward climb. Celestia's sun was reaching its zenith now, and even the indefatigable Big Mac was beginning to tire. He decided to stop and resting against the large rock wall of the mountain as he fished an apple out of his saddlebag. He munched it contentedly as he pulled out one of his favorite books, a fascinating book by a stallion named Coltian. The plot was slightly confusing, but it seemed to be about a magic ring and a fellowship of ponies that formed to safeguard it. Applejack's librarian friend Twilight had recommended it to him and let him keep it for an extra week since she knew how busy he was. He was just sitting down to read when a loud growl filled the air. All at once, Big Mac was alert, hurriedly sweeping his borrowed book back into his saddlebag. A second growl sounded as he hurriedly got to his hooves, just in time to see the source of the noise clambering up the path behind him. It was a creature he recognized from an incident about half a year ago, when that loud-mouthed show mare had came into town. A large bear, bigger than the barn back on Sweet Apple Acres, with skin seemingly made of stars and blue sky. An Ursa Minor. The monster was a bit smaller than the one that had attacked Ponyville, but it was still plenty large enough to crush a pony even the size of Big Mac under his paw. One thing that the small, rational part of his brain hadn't panicked noticed was a strange symbol inscribed on the beast's forehead, but he had no time to regard it. Big Mac was a pony of incredible strength and stalwart courage, but when faced with this immense beast, the only recourse to do was something he was very much unaccustomed to. Turn tail and run. Big Mac turned and galloped up the mountain path, hoping the Ursa wouldn't follow. But it was just a baby after all, he reasoned. And remember what Twilight had said after he banished the beast from Ponyville. It was just most likely just grumpy and stomping around, and it wasn't after it. He just needed to put some distance between him and it, and he would continue his leisurely hike. Right? Apparently not, as a loud roar and earth-shaking footsteps indicated the massive blue beast giving chase. Big Mac's powerful legs pumped desperately, trying to escape, but as strong and fit as a farm pony was, he was built for endurance, not speed. The Ursa behind him was not especially fast beast, but it was an incredibly long pace, meant that it could chew up distance at an astonishing rate, gaining on the fleeing earth pony at an alarming rate. This wasn't working, Big Mac thought, searching desperately for some means of escape. Other than the continuing to run desperately forward, his only other options were to throw himself on the mountainside or run towards the Ursa, hoping to dodge its legs and its teeth and get past it. A glance behind him showed that the option was unfeasible. The mountain path was just large enough to accommodate the beast. He'd never squeeze past. Big Mac's chest began to burn with his exertion as the Ursa Major came closer and closer, its enormous jaws snapping at him viciously as they approached. Just as he began to despair for survival and contemplate the bitter irony of dying on one's birthday, his salvation came into view. A cave set in the side of the mountain. It was a spacious opening, but far too small for the pursuing beast. With a burst born of desperation, the exhausted earth pony cleared the last few feet of the cave and dove inside just ahead of the massive bear's snapping jaws. Sprawled on the ground and gasping desperately for air, Big Mac looked back to see if the Ursa would leave. Sadly, quite the opposite was true. The beast seemed determined to follow its quarry despite the physical improbability, forcing its head and shoulders into the too small opening. It roared in frustration, its thrashing shaking the cave violently. Mac could feel vibrations through his aching, exhausted hooves. If he kept this up, it would collapse the cane bust around them. Horse apples. Big Mac swore quietly. He couldn't stay here, that was for sure. Already, pebbles and small rocks were beginning to fall from the ceiling of the cave. Thankfully, a tunnel extended deeper into the mountain, away from the madam beast. Forcing himself onto his hooves, the exhausted stallion carried down the tunnel as fast as his aching limbs could carry him. With any luck, the tunnel would come out somewhere else, so he could leave the mountain's innards without having to go past the insane Ursa. At first, Mac moved at the closest thing to a run his exhausted legs could manage, trying to escape the danger zone at the cave's mouth. Once he'd gone far enough sight he could no longer see the entrance, and the monster's roars and flailing a distant rumble, however, he slowed to a sedate walk. He pulled a flashlight from his saddlebags, holding it in his mouth to illuminate the cave. Celestia bless Applejack. She'd insisted he be prepared for anything, and had packed him a flashlight in case he got lost and stayed out past sunset. He tried to tell her that wasn't necessary, but he knew the mountains well enough to find his way. But she'd insisted, and he was glad for it. The tunnel wound a short ways past a bend which blocked off light from the entrance before opening up into a larger cavern. The cavern, sadly, only had one entrance. If he wanted to leave the cave, he'd have to go back the way he came, and he could still hear the distant roars of the disgruntled Ursa, though it seemed less agitated for the moment. Trapped as he seemed to be for the time being, Big Mac decided to look around the cavern. Not that there was much to see. It was largely empty, save for a lump of rock in the very center of the room, shaped like a very roughly hewn pedestal. Upon the pedestal rested what appeared to be a gnarled old rocking stick, just high enough for a pony to support his front hoof as he walked on it. As Big Mac approached the pedestal, regarding the stick curiously. The pedestal, he discovered, was not roughly hewn per se, but only half finished. Its base was beautiful, smooth craftsmanship, with runes of a language Big Mac did not recognize when along its length. However, about a third of the way up the pedestal's length, the fine work abruptly gave way to bare rock, as though the crafter had been given up partly through. Why had someone placed such a seemingly worthless stick here with such care, only to abandon it and leaving its resting place incomplete? Macintosh wondered about this only briefly, as another, more practical thought came into his head. Using the staff as a lever, he might be able to pry some larger rocks loose from the tunnel walls. He could buck pretty hard when he had a mind to. He figured he could kick a few of the boulders at the Ursa, and with any luck, he might chase it off. His energy bolstered by his new plan, Big Mac took the staff from his pedestal and leaned himself against it, intending to use it for its intended purpose as a walking stick first. After all, he was still quite tired. The tip of the staff came down and banged against the ground with a resounding crash that the tiny impact didn't warrant. A bright light emitted from the cane's top, glowing brighter and brighter until it enveloped him with a bright flash and a crash of thunder. Big Mac felt power surging through him like he never felt before. He dropped his flashlight to the ground as the power overtook him, wiping away his exhaustion. He barely noticed the straps of his saddlebag bursting as he grew too large for him, his body warping as the electric power washed through him, changing him to suit itself. As abruptly as it began, suddenly the display of power stopped, and the mighty being who stood in the center of the cavern opened its eyes. Miles away, one pony in the Ponyville lot was in the library of Ponyville, busily studying a history of sexuality in the Griffin tribes. Twilight found the subject endlessly engrossing and rather enlightening. It actually went some ways towards explaining the highly defensive behavior of Dash's friend, make that former friend, Gilda, during her visit to Ponyville. However, she was distracted from her studies when she suddenly detected a massive surge of magic, so powerful it almost felt like a physical blow to her horn. The shock of it knocked her to the floor, causing her to drop her book. Her book was swiftly forgotten, however, as she called to her faithful assistant. "Spike!" she called out. "Get a book of my advanced spellcraft and magical phenomena, then get a paper and quill. We intend to print us a letter." Pinkie Pie merrily hummed her cupcake song as she withdrew a fresh batch of the titular treat from her oven. She took them to her counter to apply some icing, her mind wandering as it often did. At the moment, she was wondering what clouds were made of. They just felt wet and cold when she passed through them on her whirlycopter, but Rainbow Dash slept on them all the time, and they said they were comfy and warm. How could something comfy and warm and dry and be dry and cold all at the same time? Was it magic? Was it some kind of trick? Did Pegasus wings turn clouds warm somehow? Maybe it was like baking, turning a wet and sticky batter into delicious treats. Ooh, maybe clouds were made of pastries. Suddenly, a powerful shudder ran up her spine as her pinky sense went on overdrive. Her entire body was shook with the force of the sensation, her spine twisting like a pretzel before she spun around in a circle like a miniature pink tornado. Finally, she plopped on the ground, the spinning leaving her dizzy. Pinky shook her head, trying to clear it. That was different. She hadn't felt a pinky sense like that since... "That's not good," she whispered. She looked at the cupcakes on the counter that had miraculously survived her seizure, but the colorful confections no longer appealed to her. She just wasn't hungry anymore. Princess Celestia was in a terribly boring meeting about the wages of weather ponies in Hoofington when she felt it. A wave of magic, stronger than anything any pony other than herself or her sister could manage. This wasn't her sister's magic, that much she could tell, though. This magic was new. The princess raised a hoof to stop the mirror Hoofington. I'm sorry, Parchment Paper, but I'm going to have to cut our meeting short. Something has come up. Please, put any further concerns you have in writing and have them delivered to my secretary. I'll just be sure to give them due consideration. She ignored the mayor's protest as she nearly bolted from the room. It took her less than a minute to arrive at Luna's room. The younger Alicorn was waiting for her with a grin on her face. You felt it too, didn't you, Tia? She asked excitedly, looking for all the world like a filly on Christmas morning. That was new. Oh, I felt it all right, Celestia assured her, feeling a smile on her own steal across her face. I don't know where it came from, but she was interrupted by a scroll materializing in a flash of green flame before her. Ah, sweet, dutiful Twilight. She must have felt it too. Let's see what she discovered. She levitated the scroll and opened it. Deep in the Evertree forest, a blue unicorn looked up wearily from her leaves and grass. What an Equestria? Even deeper in Evertree, where the trees grew so thick that neither the sun's harsh gaze nor the playful light of the moon could penetrate, a powerful presence stood. At last, it sighed, my revenge has come at hand. Up in the mountains, the Ursa continued to grunt and snort as it tried to force its way into the cave after its quarry. Its efforts ceased, however, when it saw something else stirring ahead. This wasn't its quarry. This was something new, and it was coming towards the monster very fast. A powerful voice rang out, echoing off the mountains. Be gone, foul beast! The creature roared, moments before something very hard and heavy impacted the Ursa's head and sent it sprawling, instantly unconscious. Floating triumphantly in the air over the beast was a glorious Alicorn, larger in stature than even Princess Celestia, if only by a few inches. His coat was a deep blue, with silver highlights along his sides. His mane flowed like spun gold and crackled with electrical power. His flank was covered with a large storm cloud key mark, bisected by a single golden lightning bolt. His wings stretched out several feet to either side, and his horn was nearly a foot long itself. To his right forehoof, the ornate hammer, with an intricately carved stone head, was bound tightly in thick twine, allowing him to swing it at ease. The majestic Alicorn looked at the beast he had felled, taking note of the rune inscribed into its forehead. The symbol looked like a stylized snake, twisted into an odd shape, almost like the letter S. The sign was extremely familiar for him. If only he could remember. The Alicorn's brow furrowed in frustration. What was wrong with him? His memories were all fuzzy. He couldn't remember. Wait. Who was he? Big Mac blinked as his mind resurfaced, taking over from the instinctual personality that had gripped his mind. His neck craned as he looked back at his new body with wide-eyed surprise. He took his eyes, coat, mane, and cutie mark all in. He raised his hoof to his forehead to feel the longhorn now protruding from it. Finally, in his own voice, he spoke the only words he felt could accurately convey his feelings. What the hey?